So today we are starting a new unit. We're starting a social studies unit, which is kind of fun. And it goes very nicely with the language arts unit. So we can do them both together. And they're both looking at a time period in history, both the language arts and the social studies, when Europeans started exploring and came to this big area of land. We call it the New World because honestly, when you look at a map of the world, you had Europe and everybody sailed around the edges of Europe, and that like connected almost to Africa. So they went to Africa and then they sailed around Africa and they went around the Arabian Peninsula and they went over to China, but they hadn't really figured out that if they sailed the other way, that there was a big body of land in between. And so they sort of thought they were sailing to China or India by going the other way, but they bumped into this other land and didn't really know it existed. And then they were just trying to figure out what was there. This was before they had navigational tools. They didn't have airplanes. They didn't have GPS. They had no way of knowing what was there. So as we think about history, it's kind of exciting to think about a time when things were so different. And we can learn a lot from history that helps us in the future. So I think you're going to really like this unit on history. I'm going to share my screen and show you what we're up to. So as we go into Florida Virtual, we go to our home screen and we go down to subjects. Well, we can go to the calendar again. We can look on the calendar and you'll see today you need to open up the agenda and it says that we are starting, where is it? Right here. Content lesson on social studies, module 1, early North America, submit 1.0 module 1 pretest. Okay. So let's go look in our subjects under social studies. You might have to scroll down to find it. We're going to open up social studies. We're going to go to the modules the way we always get around. It has the welcome and the getting started. And then here's module 1, early North America. And here's our pretest. So in a minute, I'm going to have you go to the breakout rooms and just kind of show me what you know about early North America. So it just says here, the geography of the US is so beautiful and history is so rich. I wish I knew a way to neatly represent it. Wait, I have an idea. How about a scrapbook? So this is our character and she's making a scrapbook, Ava. She's going to get creative with social studies and start a scrapbook. Are you ready to make some memories? Learning about social studies takes you on a journey through time. Scrapbooks and journals are tools often used to connect us to the people who've come before us. And that's because in the olden days, we don't have any way to know how it was back then, except for the things that are left behind. So mostly it was like the people who wrote it down. Yeah, Lauren? I'll bet you're happy.
Yeah. Are we going to do like ancient history?
Well, yeah, this one is, so 5th grade, the big focus on 5th grade is the country, the United States history,
yeah,
when Europeans first came to the US and what happened. So that's the period we're looking at. But you're going to see that this starts kind of further back, which is kind of fun. So here's your assignment. Take the mod 1 pretest. So in a minute, I'm going to put you in breakout rooms, let you take that pretest. But then we're going to go on and just take a look at this first mod. So if we click up here, it's going to take us into that first lesson. And you can see that this is 101. You're going to be working on this one tomorrow. If we look at our week at the glance, which I happen to have open up here somewhere. Do I have it open? I did have it open, but now I have 10,000 things open. All right, let me go back to that. I want to go back to that because I want you to take a look at the way this one's going to work. It's going to go a little bit more slowly than some of the other topics. In social studies, you'll pretty much have 2 days per lesson. So if you look at this today, it doesn't say anything's due. And then 101 is due here on Wednesday. 102, these little brown things, if you want to see them on your calendar, you're going to have to make sure that you've highlighted social studies so that it will show up. 101 is due on Wednesday. 102 is due on Friday. 103 is due next Tuesday. So you have about 2 days per unit. On my calendar, at least, I can't get the quizzes to show up. I don't know why, but they do not show up. So back to social studies and just taking a look at what this unit is covering. As we go down into it, you're going to see it starts with physical features, maps, and it's interesting because I don't know if you remember when Ms. Janney and I were talking about longitude and latitude, but they're going to teach you a lesson on that. And then ancient North American civilization. So this will be the native people who lived in this country for many, many thousands of years before Europeans ever came here. They were the first people here. They had very sophisticated societies in this country, and there were a lot of different groups of Native Americans who lived all over the US. Then we're going to take a look at some different groups of Native Americans and the different parts of the US and where they lived. And finally, that's pretty much this first unit. And then we go into European exploration. So this one really is about the early years in the United States. One of the things I promised you we were going to look at in this module, and again, all you have to do today is this pre-test. And then tomorrow we're going to start on this lesson, hunting for physical features. But I promised you that we were going to take a look at this one place. So we're actually going to go on a little bit of a field trip right now to a place called Fort Vancouver. And the reason is that I noticed in your lesson that they take you to a fort in Florida, which is cool. But this fort that we're looking at right here, do you see the logs sticking up right here? This is over in Vancouver, Washington, and you can go visit there with your family. You could go there tomorrow if you talked mom and dad into it. And it's a national park. You can see it's through the National Park Service. And you can go visit it. In fact, I've gone there with kids before. So it's only about 20 minutes away from us. And when you go there, you can see all the things in Fort Vancouver. But the neat thing is during COVID, they made a cool thing for students to do a virtual field trip to Fort Vancouver. So we're going to start that right now. And because it has a lot of different sections, we're only going to do one little part each day. So each day we'll visit a different part of Fort Vancouver. When my grandfather first came to this part of the world, he worked out at Fort Vancouver as a farrier, putting horseshoes on horses. So it says here, are you a student? Read on. Welcome to Fort Vancouver. Fort Vancouver is part of the Fort Vancouver Historical Site, which is part of the National Park Service. The National Park Service takes care of special places across the US and shares the stories of places with people like you. On this page, you're going to learn about the buildings and people who lived at Fort Vancouver. You'll also get to do fun activities and read about kids who lived and worked at the fort. But first, let's talk about what makes Fort Vancouver special. Who built Fort Vancouver? So a long time ago, long time ago, before this was Oregon, there was not even a state. Most people lived on the other side of the US, on the eastern side. And then the first people who came to this part of Oregon, well, does anybody know why they came here?
Farming.
Going to find the western land, I think.
Well, they did want
Gold.
land, but before then, well, it was before gold. The thing that was worth the most money back then,
I think it was farming because
it wasn't
Oregon
farming.
isn't wet.
It's a great guess, but nope.
don't
Let's see what it
know.
says here. Fort Vancouver was built by a British company called the Hudson's Bay Company in 1825.
Oh, I think I know now. It was a fur company.
The Hudson's Bay Company was a
Fur
fur.
company.
Wasn't it?
So believe it or not,
What?
the gold of those days was animal fur, and specifically it was beavers. And the reason they liked them is that in Europe, the men were wearing these big tall hats that were made out of beaver fur. So employees of the Hudson's Bay Company trapped and prepared furs for North America to send to Europe to be made into luxury goods like hats and coats. Who and what was here before the fort was built? Well, of course, before Europeans came to build the fort, there were a lot of Native Americans living here, the Cowlitz people and the Chinook people. They've lived along the Columbia River for a very, very long time, thousands of years. Before the fort was built, this place was a prairie. Here, Native people hunted, collected camas roots, which they ate, and passed through on their way to other villages to trade. Did you have something you wanted to add, Lauren?
The reason why I thought it was gold is because, I thought it was because like during slaves, because there were like free states and then slave states, and
But
yeah,
this area really, you're right, but that was over on the East Coast. Over here on the West Coast,
yeah.
a little different.
Yeah.
Why was Fort Vancouver built where it is? Hudson's Bay Company built many other fur trading forts in the Northwest and Alaska. They built Fort Vancouver to serve as a headquarters for these forts. Furs from other forts all came to Fort Vancouver before they were sent by ship to England. So one of the reasons they built Fort Vancouver where they did is that they could sail a big ship up the Columbia River because it was such a big river. They could get a big ship all the way up to Fort Vancouver, which was pretty far inland. So if you go to visit Fort Vancouver, it's right by the Columbia River. If you've ever driven into Washington State, like on your way up to Seattle or to Vancouver, you probably have seen Fort Vancouver on the right-hand side. Why is Fort Vancouver an important place? Many different kinds of people came to Fort Vancouver to find work, to live, and to trade. For those of us who still live in the Northwest, and for all Americans, the fort is a place where we can remember and learn from the past. And one of the neatest things is they have rebuilt Fort Vancouver so you can see the way it looked back then. Next, journey on by exploring the buildings at the fort through special videos, activities, and readings. And here's the very first one, the Chief Factor's House. We're going to take a look at this. Hopefully.
Bonjour. Hello. Gia Gwitch. Hello. Aloha. My name is Reggie. I'm a volunteer with the National Park Service here at historic Fort Vancouver. From my hat to my shoes, I'm dressed as a gentleman clerk of the Hudson's Bay Company in 1845. My 5 opening greetings gave voice to the major groups of people who lived and worked here during that time period. French Canadian, English, Irish, Scottish, and Hawaiian. Founded way back in 1670 with headquarters originally in London, England, the Hudson's Bay Company was, and still is, a major corporation with international reach. Although today it's a Canadian company based in Toronto, the Hudson's Bay Company remains the oldest corporation in all of North America. When Fort Vancouver was christened on March 19th, 1825, the Hudson's Bay Company was a British fur trading company. And the #1 fur at the time, the most sought after, the most valuable, was beaver, because gentlemen in England, throughout Europe and elsewhere, were wearing beaver felt hats. You'll learn more about furs in the fur store. Right now, we're going to focus our attention on this big, beautiful building called the Chief Factor's House. Imagine for a moment that you are an American settler who has spent about 6 months walking 2,000 grueling miles on the Oregon Trail. Most likely, you're part of a farming family, lured west by politicians and missionaries, poetically promising new opportunities as rich as the soil in Willamette Valley, and a better future, glistening brightly like the snow atop Mount Hood. When you finally arrive at the gates of Fort Vancouver, you are physically exhausted, probably sick or injured, and completely without supplies. Then the large wooden gates creak open, and there is the grand Chief Factor's house. What a splendid sight it is. Lovely flower gardens flank not 1, but 2 curving staircases that gracefully lead up to a sweeping veranda with lush green grapevines arching overhead. And of course, there are the 2 eye-catching naval cannons. Those cannons, however, were purely for decoration. That's right, they were meant to impress, never to be fired. The Chief Factor's house, as the name indicates, was a house and home for Fort Vancouver's 2 top bosses called Chief Factors. In 1845, the east side of the house was home to the #2 boss, Chief Factor James Douglas, plus his wife Amelia and their 4 young daughters. Dr. John McLaughlin, Fort Vancouver's first and longest serving Chief Factor, and who you may know as the father of Oregon, occupied the west side of the house along with his wife, Marguerite. Besides being a private residence, the Chief Factor's house also had 1 room in particular that served as the center for business discussions, religious services, and social activities. Please, come in. Let's take a look back in time.
Pretty fancy.
Welcome to the dining room. This is the largest and most colorful room in the Chief Factor's house. As you know, 2 families lived in the house, but this was not a family dining room. Officially referred to as the gentleman's mess, it was here that the 2 chief factors presided over the gentlemen of the Hudson's Bay Company as they dined 3 times a day, always discussing company business. The women and children who lived inside of the house were not company employees and thus could not contribute to those business discussions. So they dined separately in the women's mess, a small dining room connected to the east parlor on the Douglas side of the house. They received the same food as the men. It was served to them, just in a different location. Here at this very long table set with beautiful dinnerware and silver candelabra, the gentlemen followed a very strict seating arrangement. At the head of the table sat Dr. McLaughlin. To his right was Mr. Douglas. Then the gentlemen of the company, primarily clerks like myself, sat in descending order based upon rank and experience. At the foot of the table sat the newest and youngest clerks, who did not speak unless spoken to. They were expected to listen and learn. It may surprise you to learn that in 1845, both in England and in the United States, it was entirely legal and quite common for children, girls as well as boys, to work 16 hours a day, 6 days a week, starting at the age of 9. Wow.
You guys would have been
Children
working.
performed hard labor on farms. They worked in dark, dusty coal mines, crawling through jagged tunnel spaces too small for adults. And they toiled in stifling hot factories, operating extremely dangerous machinery, which far too often claimed young fingers and hands.
What?
Fort Vancouver, the youngest person ever to sign a 7-year work contract with the Hudson's Bay Company was Alexander Latty. Born to a Scottish father and a Chinook mother, Alexander signed on to be an apprentice carpenter when he was 11 years old. So, considering the alternatives, the young clerks who sat at the foot of this table had plenty of motivation to listen and learn. In addition to all the business discussions that were held here, on Sundays, this room functioned as a church. Whenever visiting missionaries were present at Fort Vancouver, Dr. McLaughlin graciously invited them to conduct church services here. Otherwise, Dr. McLaughlin and/or Mr. Douglas would themselves conduct 2 church services each Sunday, one Catholic, the other Anglican. The third function of the dining room was to host festive holiday dances, lavish banquets, and a few weddings, including that of Dr. McLaughlin's own daughter, Eloisa, to company clerk William Glenn Ray. I trust that this brief introduction to the Chief Factor's house has given you some insight to its purpose and functions. So, until you have an opportunity to visit Fort Vancouver in person and hear more of its many, many stories, I bid you adieu.
Wait, hold on.
What?
So, you're telling me if we were born long ago, we would have been working right now?
Not only if you were born long ago, but if you were born in another country. There are many children who work around the world. And then in this country, they passed some laws to make it illegal for children to work. But when I was a young girl, when we got to about middle school or high school, we all went to work in the fields. We picked berries and we picked beans and all that. Nowadays, kids don't really work until high school. Yeah. Amity, what is your question?
So I just wanted to say the reason that I was gone for about 10 minutes.